Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, in playing Diablo 4 and the Necromancer, I was interested to dig back into the PoE2 DB website and have a look at some of the minion skills that we should be anticipating. And quite frankly, PoE2 is going to be way better than D4 as far as Necromancers and minions go. But anyway, let's talk about some of the skills. Let's get into the video. Okay, so far to date, much of my information comes from poe2db.tw. Basically, this is just a website that somebody is running as a fan-made site, which compiles tons of information about all the interviews and everything else to date. So what's been essentially shown here has been covered off in interviews or from videos and screenshots and whatnot, or Reddit. But yeah, if you want to check out more, you can definitely check out this website. I'll put the link in the description below. Okay, so first off the rank, there are around 12 different minion skills currently featured on the PoE2DB website, which more or less cover off on certain skills that range from Druidic through to predominantly the Witch class in this case. Now, we don't know if there's a Necromancer Ascendancy yet. I would say that there probably will be, but we won't know more until obviously the beta or the early access hits in, hopefully, I think it's like 40 days or something of that nature. So yeah, we're going to have to sit tight and strap in for that one. But in the meantime, there's a lot of cool stuff to unpack, so let's have a look at some of the skill breakdowns. Now, the thing that we do know about the Necromancer, or the Witch class in this case for Path of Exile 2, is that moving forwards it will be like a minion army of darkness sort of thing, and everything more or less will self-cast, including skeletons and whatnot. And this was covered off in a lot of the reveals around 6 months ago from GGG. So it's very much going to be a very interesting and very different playstyle to how we've seen minions in the past. The other big thing that we know about minions is predominantly there will be at least one ascendancy class or one minion summon per different ascendancy. Now, I don't know how much truth there is to this, but this was also covered off by Jonathan in one of the interviews earlier in the year. Okay, so the first skill making a comeback here is Raging Spirits, or Summon Raging Spirits. Now, on the screen, I've got the Path of Exile 1 version and the Path of Exile 2 version that we can see, not including the alt gems, which are of enormity, which, quite frankly, is not a very good skill in Path of Exile 2. But basically, there are some changes here. So the total summon limit is decreased by 10. Now, we don't know how you can increase summon limit yet. I would assume that it's built into the tree, but it could also be built into the class. So it's really interesting. But the biggest change here is maximum 5 spirit summon per spellcast. Now, usually you would have to essentially buff up or support gem up your SRS in PoE 1 to be able to cast multiple minions. And at one point in time, I think you could only cast a cap of 3 to 4 minions at any point in time anyway. But this being said, this is very different in Path of Exile 2, where you can basically front load the minions out a lot quicker. Now, if they work the same, I'm not entirely sure. Well, that's soon to be seen. And the other thing is, will Reservation adjust the total limit? We don't know this yet. And the other thing is the fact that Raging Spirits takes up Spirit Reservation in Path of Exile 2, sort of indicates that they might be autocast, and I'm not entirely sure about that because we haven't really seen anything on SRS yet. But if they are autocast, then basically you could just have minion Raging Spirits just, funneling out of your character without ever having to click a button while you focus on buffing them up and activating different sort of, debuffs on enemies and things like that, which is a very different playstyle because usually you're just button mashing on one button and hitting Raging Spirits to cast as many as you can to overwhelm your enemy. Now, as far as them being supported by poison on hit, things like that, we have no idea yet. I would assume that they would be able to be buffed up like that. And we get a base conversion of 70% of physical to fire damage as well, which is very different. Projectiles from fire spells summon a spirit on hit, and that might give away to what I was just talking about. So maybe you have to cast projectiles in order to be able to get an SRS to actually, or an RS to summon. But this is also, just a very interesting skill overall, and it's good to see it make its way back into Path of Exile 2, and hopefully it's a lot of fun. It's also a level 5 skill, so it's a low level skill too that you can get access to pretty much when you start the first act in Path of Exile 2 from the looks. Okay, so the next skill that they've also featured is the Raise Zombie skill, which is coming back. It's accessible at level 4 from what we can see. But this is really interesting. Base and power duration. So it looks like it has an active component or the ability to proc an active component. So, empowered zombies, or how they sort of coined it in the gameplay that we've seen so far in the interviews, is you can essentially super juice your zombies or create super zombies. But the interesting thing here is the gem base level is 10. Now, is this level 10 at level 4? Sorry, is this a limit of 10 at level 4, or is this a limit of 10 scaled up in entirety? Now, the other thing too, which is really interesting that we can't see on the gem, unlike Summon Raging Spirits, is there is no spirit reservation. So it sort of alludes to the fact that are these zombies sort of, so we have consume a corpse or power charge to create a zombie. Zombies created from power charge are empowered for a long duration. Now, does the zombie have a limited sort of shelf life and it dies when the empowerment dies off? Or, you know, do they stay for a bit longer? Are they permanent? We don't know this sort of information in great depth yet. But these are all things that we'll hopefully find out in the coming, I guess, few weeks with the press release that's on its way and whatnot. But also very interesting. We have no idea how this works, and it's totally different to how the zombie class, or sorry, the zombie skill worked in the previous game. Now, there might be uniques in the game that would allow these zombies to stay up for longer or have them permanently empowered, but these are all things that we're going to have to find out. And is there even like a zombie mancer ascendancy for the witch? We don't know, but this was alluded to all the way back in the first Exile Con many years ago. Anyway, something to sort of look out for and get excited about. Now, unfortunately for Path of Exile 1, there is absolutely nothing that you can compare to skeletons with in Path of Exile 2, right? So the only thing that comes to mind is Val Summon Skeletons, because this sort of does everything that Val Summon Skeletons does, and then some. But what I've got on the screen are a few of the skeleton skills, and we'll cycle through them as we sort of talk through them. So Skeleton Arsonist, also note this is accessible from level 1, so these guys essentially throw, reviving Skeleton Arsonist that can detonate other minions on command, or throw bombs as well, which is really interesting that this is a level 1 skill. Seems really powerful, but also really cool. We haven't seen anything like that. So basically you can have skeletons that throw bombs. Skeleton Brute summons hard-hitting, reviving skeleton brutes, which can stun. Now, I assume that these are like the big skeletons that you see from Val Skeletons, the ones with the big hammers or the big clubs. But it'll be interesting to see what these take the form of. These are level 8 when these come into activation. Then we have the Cleric, and I would assume this would, essentially revive, which is exactly what its catch tag says as well, or flavor text says. So these are reviving skeletons, so you could self-heal or, keep reviving your minions if you needed to. Like, for example, maybe summon Spectres or zombies. But again, we don't know enough about these yet. The next one is Skeletal Frost Mages. So, in Path of Exile 1 currently, they have an alt gem for skeleton mages, and you could basically use threshold gems to adjust the type of elemental damage that they do. That build was really popular for a long amount of time. However, now it's sort of dropped off since the changes to the game and minions really hit hard. It really affected, skeletal mages. But that being said, this is really splitting it up, and you could specialize. So you could have a Skeletal Frost Mage army, or like a Cleric army, or Summoner army, or you could have like Skeletal Brutes, and we'll talk about a few more in the next sort of set of skills that we'll feature. But yeah, it's really cool that you can adjust these on the fly. This gem is accessible from level 7. So all these are relatively accessible early, and because you can have up to 9 skills, you could have, 9 different types of these, and it'll just attribute to your total cap. Based on your spirit reservation from here. It doesn't seem to say that there is a cap of the number of minions, but there probably is a cap, and we'll find that out pretty soon as well when the game sort of gives us a bit more information. Now, some other skeleton skills that we've got, because there's like 8 different skeleton skills that we've had revealed so far, is the Skeletal Reaver, which, similar to like Diablo, I'm assuming will be a scythe-wielding, big-ass bloody skeleton that'll just charge enemies down with hyper-aggression. You've got the Skeletal Sniper as well, so this is the archery sort of skeleton. The Skeletal Storm Mage as well, which again, summons a Storm Mage skeleton. Who knows how that'll work and what buffs that'll have. I feel like that'll be really powerful. And my favorite, which is the Skeletal Warrior. And the reason why I like that is I am an OG Skelly player from like Diablo 2 when that was a thing on the Necromancer. And I don't mind the fact that skeletons are the main sort of yield of enemy for the Necromancer in Diablo 4. And I definitely liked it when skeletons were big in Path of Exile. And when Cyrus first came out, one of the first big kills in Standard was a Juggernaut playing skeletons, which I thought was awesome. So yeah, that's where my mindset is. If I play a Necromancer, I'm probably going to play Skeletal Warriors and Skeletal Brutes and Reavers. But yeah, anyway, there's tons of things to look forward to with skeletons in Path of Exile 2 from what we can see from the gems revealed so far. Now, in relation to Spectres in Path of Exile 2, I take this as being treated a bit differently than in Path of Exile 1. So, the way that it worked in Path of Exile 1 is you would have to summon corpses, and then more or less you would then cast a Spectre or raise Spectre on it, and this would essentially mean that that Spectre, only in the instance of that one corpse being resurrected, is bound to your character, right? Which meant if your Spectre died, you would have to go refine the corpses and do the whole exercise again, which was quite painful and one of the reasons why people tend to avert away from Spectres, even though Spectres are really good. When they get ripped, then you have to go and refine all your Spectres again. Really frustrating when you play Spectres, unless you beef them up enough that they're totally immortal or near to immortal, and even then they can die to one-shot mechanics and stuff like that. Now, in Path of Exile 2, it looks like a bit of a different approach. And it has this new Bind Spectre gem. So what this appears to be is, and I think people were calling this like the Pokemon skill, where more or less you could bind the Spectre to your character, so even if the Spectre dies, you could resummon that same Spectre again. Now, I haven't seen any other raised Spectre gems and stuff like that. I would assume that there are different types of Spectres potentially, or maybe this is the raised Spectre gem to itself, and it's got a second active skill or something of that nature. But more or less what this looks like is now you can actually like character bind the Spectre, and you don't have to go and refine the corpses again. But, you know, take that with a grain of salt. We haven't seen this work in play, and we don't really know a lot of information about this just yet. But it looks like a different approach and a much better approach and a much less frustrating approach, which is a significant improvement for Path of Exile 2 over Path of Exile 1, because I think everyone who's played Spectres would agree that it sucks when your Spectre dies, as it sucks when your AG dies. Okay, so finally, as we're getting a Druid class finally in Path of Exile, we have Summon Wolf, which has also been featured on the PoE2 DB website. Now, the only way that you previously were able to get Summon Wolves were from two specific unique items in Path of Exile 1, which was the Lore of the Wilds, which I did try, and you would have to do a Squire setup, super expensive and not very good, or Ridgewald's Crest, which is a leveling item which only gave you level 10 Summon Spectral Wolves. So overall, this is significant as far as you can have totally different summons now outside of necromantic summons, or undead summons, which is really cool. What this also means is potentially they might add things like ravens, bears, corpse creepers, all sorts of stuff like that. Who knows, that we haven't seen all the gems yet. There's hundreds that we can expect and more to be added over time. So the Druid class could stack up to be a really cool summoner class as well. We just haven't seen enough information about the Druid to know basically anything at this stage. Also noting that quite often in Path of Exile, you can cross skills over across the different ascendancies and classes, which also means that potentially you could use Spectres to buff up your minions or whatnot, however that works for your Druid. So your Druid could become increasingly more powerful using Necromancer skills, or you could have a Necromantic Druid, which would be really interesting to have, like, you know, wolves that are buffed up by undead means and stuff like that. But now we're just build cooking, and we don't want to get into that level of speculation until we get a bit more information about Path of Exile 2 at this stage. Okay, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this, open to any suggestions anyone might have, chuck it in the description or the comments below, and I will dig into it. One of the things I like doing is going into the skills and coming up with different build ideas and things like that, and also understanding the skills in great depth. It means you can make some pretty zany and awesome stuff. Now, based on what we know about Path of Exile 2, scaling will be a lot easier, and what I can see is outside of the standard gem recommendations, we could potentially be able to cook up some absolutely wild builds that just are absolutely crazy. That's the biggest plus about Path of Exile style games, is you can play to your imagination. Whether the build's good or bad, that's something that we're just going to have to test. Anyway, don't forget to like and sub to the channel. Don't forget to follow the X and the Twitch as well. I'm going to be back to Path of Exile 1 because I just don't enjoy Diablo the way that others might. It's just not a game made for someone like me. But that being said, I will see you guys later and have a good one.